All right, let's go over how to develop a basic nutrition program. So what I want you to do is go back and look at your pretest, look at your health history questionnaire and the SMART goals that you developed for your fitness program, and use that to determine how you're going to develop just a basic nutrition program. So we need to understand macronutrients. So you have fats, carbs, and proteins. Those are all used within the body as an energy source. Ideally, you want at least 2 of the 3, but it's best to have all 3 when you're developing a plan. I know y'all have probably heard of like the keto diet or the Atkins diet, where they're cutting out carbohydrates, or not necessarily cutting them all the way out, but really reducing them. But you still have carbohydrate in the diet. There are situations where people are surviving up in the north and they were only eating snowshoe hare, and they got what's called protein poisoning because the snowshoe hare were so lean, and since they weren't eating the internal organs where there were fats, they were just getting pure protein and they ended up dying. And all of these can be broken down to generate ATP. So proteins through deamination can be broken down and used within the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. Fats can be broken down through beta oxidation, converted to free fatty acids, and those can be used. And carbohydrate can be broken down. And our bodies really are more efficient at breaking down carbohydrate as an energy source. That's the reason you'll see some people complain if they're on a keto diet how they felt kind of lethargic. And part of that was just improper setup of their program. But the other part is their brains are a lot more efficient at running off of glucose. And if you're going to do any type of endurance sport, you're almost going to have carbohydrate so that you have the glycogen stores within your muscle and liver. So when the glucose is gone, you have something to tap into to keep going, especially long distance events. Okay, so this is just a generic diet or breakdown of total calories and where they should come from. You're going to see a lot of literature talk about the percentages that you need, and these vary. Like, I don't go by this. This is just something to give a beginner a starting point, and you kind of have to play around with it if you don't know your own genetics and you haven't ever messed with diet and percent of calories coming from carbohydrate, fats, and proteins. So you notice 55 to 60% from carbohydrate, 30 to 40 from fats, 10 to 15 from protein. I switch this up, so it's a third of each one of these for me. So a third from carbohydrate, a third of my total calories come from fat, a third for protein. And that's worked really well for me. And I've done that for the last 10 years. I've had a lot less problems keeping weight off. And I don't feel lethargic. I feel like I have a lot of energy. So what I'm getting at is this is just a starting point. Obviously, if you're on a keto diet, that would not work, having 50 to 60% of carbohydrates coming from, or total calories coming from carbohydrate. But it's just a starting point. So calories and macronutrients. So 1 gram of fat has 9 kcals. And that should make sense because since it can store that much energy, that's where we store our excess energy. That's why you have fat stores on your body. Because they can hold, for 1 gram of fat, it can hold a lot more calories than carbohydrate can and than protein can. So you notice here we're only getting 4 kcals or kilocalories from carbohydrate for 1 gram of carbohydrate and 1 gram of protein. So let's get into types of protein. So whey and casein are both milk proteins. You'll get them from dairy. So whey is typically used, if somebody's supplementing with whey, it's typically used after a workout. It gets into the system fast. Your body can use it pretty quick. Casein is slower to be digested. A lot of bodybuilders will take this in as their last meal so they get protein slowly into the system throughout the night as they rest. Problem is, it can cause constipation. So it has some problems associated with it. So you want to be careful if you're supplementing with casein. You want to make sure that you take in plenty of fiber. So eggs, we can use, of the protein that comes from eggs, we use a lot of it. So our bodies are real efficient at using that. Soy, you get proteins from soy, grains and nuts, some plants. And we'll talk about the essential, the 9 essential, and the 11 non-essential proteins in just a second. So recommendations for how much to take in. The minimum is 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that can be a plant-based protein. Just make sure that it's complete, that you're getting those essential proteins, or amino acids, I should say. And then you've got 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight to gain. So just to maintain, you've got to take in 1 gram per kilogram. To actually start to put on some muscle, 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. You got to be careful. It all depends on what you're doing. If you're a bodybuilder or an extreme endurance athlete, then you're going to need more protein than the average person to repair the damage that you've done through training. But the average person doesn't need that much. So be real careful, because a lot of the protein supplements you take will recommend taking like 70 or 80 grams at a time. And obviously they want you to take their product and use it up, so you have to buy more. But your body can only use about 30 or 40 grams of that based on how much lean muscle mass you have. So you're just peeing away your money. Your kidneys have to filter all that stuff out. So protein is not stored in the body. And if you don't take in enough protein, your muscle will be broken down. Your muscle will be broken down and used as a protein source. So we have 20 amino acids. 11 of them are non-essential, meaning that our body can produce them. But then you have essential amino acids that must be taken in from an outside source. And not all plant sources are essential or have all the essential amino acids. But you can get them through combinations of different grains and nuts and beans. But it's a lot of work. So meat sources have all the essential amino acids. Types of fat, you have monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated, and trans fats. So monounsaturated would be something like olive oil. Take that in. It's a healthy fat. Polyunsaturated would be something like some of your vegetable oils have a lot of polyunsaturated fats. I believe canola oil has a lot of polyunsaturated fats. Again, healthy fats. Some of these, well, both will reduce total cholesterol. Some reduce LDL, and you got to be careful because some will also reduce HDL. Saturated, there's been a lot of debate about saturated. Is it bad? It's bad in large quantities, but we do need it. But trans fat is bad. So our body recognizes it as being, well, it's even worse for us than saturated fat. And it raises LDL and lowers HDL. Really bad for us. Good fats lower LDL, the bad cholesterol, raises HDL. But you got to be careful because some of them will lower HDL as well. And these are our bad fats, saturated. It's saturated, I kind of hesitate to put it under bad fats because we do need some saturated fats. And it's still debated. Let's just say that. Let's just leave it at that. Obviously, you don't want large amounts of saturated fat in your diet, but small amounts, research is showing, could be beneficial. Types of carbohydrate, you have simple sugars. That's what you want to avoid. Those are ones that have a really high glycemic index, causing a big insulin response in your body. And we're thinking now, a lot of researchers are thinking now, that a lot of these metabolic issues are the result of eating too many simple sugars, having an insulin response all the time, causing cells to become insulin resistant. It's not just simple sugars. I mean, this can happen from protein. It can happen from fats. You're still getting an insulin response, but simple sugars really cause an insulin response within the body. So if you're snacking all through the day, even fats and proteins can cause an insulin response. And that constant release of insulin is creating insulin resistance from the cells, which can cause a type of diabetes. So monounsaturated single sugar molecules like glucose, fructose, galactose, disaccharides are all simple sugars. So we've got two simple sugars joined together, things like table sugar, sucrose. And you got polysaccharides. So this is, we're looking for those complex carbohydrates. It takes longer for them to get into our bloodstream or to be digested and get into our bloodstream. They don't cause such an insulin response, and they are nutrient dense. So we're getting some nutrients from them. A lot of these simple sugars are just empty energy. We're not getting a lot of nutrients, from table sugars, just empty calories. Fructose, you might get some vitamin C. You might get some nutrients if you're getting that from a fruit source. But we've got to be real careful. Really have to moderate simple sugar in your diet. Micronutrients. So these are our vitamins and minerals. So we have fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. That's why we do want to take the healthy fats in. They're stored in the body. You can't get too much. That's debatable. So this is coming from your book. You can get too much. A lot of research is being shown here on getting too much vitamin E. And you can get too little if you don't take enough fat in. So somebody's just, the older notion of just stripping fat from your diet, avoiding it at all costs, can be harmful when it comes to these fat-soluble vitamins. So vitamin-soluble micronutrients are B and C, not stored in the body, must be consumed. So there are diseases that result when you don't take enough of them in. So an example would be like scurvy, like when sailors way back when were crossing and didn't have enough vitamin C, they would get scurvy. And then not stored in the body, must be consumed. Same thing with our minerals. So HDL, this should have really been further up, and I'll switch that around in the PowerPoint. High density lipoprotein. So this is like the vacuum cleaner for the body. Cleans out the arteries. You want your HDL levels to be over 40. This is something I've struggled with. I finally got to a point where I'm only eating 3 times a day in an 8-hour window, and my HDL levels have finally gone up, and they're finally up in the upper 50s. So I think I figured that part out in my diet. LDL, low density lipoprotein. These stick to the walls, can eventually help form plaques that can rupture and cause cardiovascular issues. You want that to be under 100. And here's a chart that kind of explains your total cholesterol. You want less than 200. That would be desirable. Borderline highs, somewhere between 200 and 239. Highs over 240. And really what you should look at is your cholesterol ratio. So you want to look at, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Let me finish this. So LDL cholesterol less than 130. And then borderline high is 130 to 159. And anything over 160 is high. And then HDL cholesterol, 50 and higher would be ideal. Borderline, really, it should say low. Warning sign, because we're going in the reverse direction here, is between 40 and 49. That's kind of where I've been, and there have been times where I'm less, right on the border of 40. So that's why I've worked on that one. And triglycerides, I've never had an issue with. Less than 200. Last time mine were like 80 something, 89 I think it was. Borderline high is 200. to 399, and then greater than 400 is extremely high. So CRP levels, this is a measure of inflammation within your body. I'm not going to go through all the different things that you should be looking on at your blood work, but this is one's extremely important if you have a family history of heart disease. You want to find out what foods are causing inflammation, and this can be a measure of it. So if you get anything higher than 3 milligrams per liter in your blood work, then you want to try to dial it back and take things out of your normal diet that may be causing it. Caloric expenditure, calories in, calories out. This is just common sense, really. You need to find out how many calories can you take in and maintain weight. There are formulas out there, but really you have to play it by ear. So it all depends. How much lean muscle mass do you have? How that's going to create a higher metabolism. The more lean muscle mass you have, the more calories you burn at rest, and the more calories you burn when you're active. So to tell somebody based on how much they weigh and how tall they are, how many calories they should take in, well, we really don't have enough information to do that. We're all different, and if you just want to do a common sense test, just start playing around, documenting your diet, getting an idea of how many calories you take in during a day and what's maintaining your weight. Like for me, if I eat 3,300 calories every day, I will maintain as long as my activity level stays the same. As long as I'm working out once a day and I do my traditional routine. So you've also got to factor in how many you're burning. So calories in, how much are we eating? Calories out, how much are we burning? And you need to know your cholesterol ratio. This is why I was saying that we'll come back to that. And that should really be right below HDL and LDL. I'm going to move some of this stuff around so it's a little bit more organized. But cholesterol ratio is your total over your HDL. So if you know your total cholesterol and you know your HDL, divide those. And that'll give you a ratio. Ideally, 3.5 is optimal. That's what you want it to be. That means you've got, compared to your total, a pretty high HDL. As HDL goes up, it'll really, you've got to factor in total too, because that's got your LDL in it. But it's total divided by HDL. So I'm going to move some of these around. When you finally read this, it's going to be a little bit more orderly and make a little bit more sense. Some of those somehow got out of order. So I will see you in the next video.